Greetings, everyone. Welcome to the second class in this second semester of the Emerald Choral Academy. I am Gary Cannon, the Artistic Director of the Emerald Ensemble, a professional choir based in Seattle. The Emerald Choral Academy is a series of interactive webinars during which our area's leading professional choristers reveal their personal tricks of the trade to community singers. These webinars are then made available freely to singers across the world via YouTube. The Emerald Ensemble is very grateful to our generous donors and organizations who have made this project possible, including For Culture and the Seattle Office of Arts and Culture. We encourage anyone participating or viewing this webinar to make a donation as you are able at emeraldensemble.org. You can also subscribe to our YouTube channel and join our mailing list to hear about future sessions of the Academy and other activities of the Emerald Ensemble. And in a moment, we'll place links to that in the chat section. This webinar is being recorded. By participating, you are granting the Emerald Ensemble permission to share your contribution. Your microphones and cameras will remain off for the duration of the presentation. You can ask questions to the presenter by typing into the chat or the Q&A features at the bottom of your screen. Then periodically, I will interject to field your questions. Today's instructor is the Emerald Choral Academy's first repeat presenter. Which feels like a landmark of some kind. I don't know.
Some kind. It just means we've been doing this for too long.
for at least a little bit, which is nice. Ever since I first met Melissa Plagemann at an audition, she has been practically my go-to mezzo-soprano for anything. She's one of those very few, very rare singers whose skills are equally adept at the opera stage, an oratorio soloist, as a recitalist, and as an ensemble singer. I'm personally of the opinion that there is no music that Melissa cannot sing perfectly. Melissa's topic today is rehearsing at home. So it's a great pleasure to introduce to you my friend and colleague, Melissa Plagemann.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for coming today. I'll just say before I start that when I was thinking about this talk, I really wanted to include something for everybody on the musical knowledge spectrum. So I'm sure some of you have knowledge that is way beyond some of the basic things that I'm going to talk about, and some of you may not. And hopefully everybody will get something out of this. So I am just going to share my screen. Rehearsing at home, which is something that we all are doing all the time lately, right? But I really am hopeful that we're not too far in the distant future away from being able to sing together in groups again and have rehearsals. And I know a lot of us have been having virtual choir rehearsals, maybe once or twice a week, and have some music. And I know also that lots of us have been doing virtual choir recordings, and that is a whole other can of worms that I think none of us were really prepared for, maybe a year ago. We all have lots more recording and technology knowledge than we had a year ago, right? So the first thing I think that is really important about rehearsing at home and practicing your choir music at home is feel free to mark up your score. I'm always telling my voice students, anything that helps you interpret the music other than the notes on the page, anything you need to add is totally fair game, whether that is circling intervals, whether that is, really anything. A look at my score is like any score of mine has marks all over it. A lot of times when we're singing in choirs, we are given original copies of a score that we hand back in, hopefully clean, to be returned after the concert. And this doesn't apply to every piece of music that we sing. I'm sure there are many of us who have lots of music that we sing that we're not going to need to mark up much at all to be able to sing it. But when you come across something that you know you're going to be making a lot of marks in, I would highly suggest just making a photocopy, and you can hand that photocopy to the conductor after the concert to be shredded if there's a copyright issue. But it's nice to have something that you don't have to feel badly about marking. Color is your friend. Once you have a score that you can mark however you want, I would highly suggest using something other than pencil. I like to use a pencil in rehearsal and, make notes. And then at home, if it's something that I know I need to pay attention to, I will put it in a different color. So whether that's highlighting your part, whether it's having a different color pencil for like dynamics and key changes and time signature changes, feel free to use colors. And if you're singing in a foreign language, write your translation into the copy so that when you're singing, you can just remind yourself, even if you've looked up a translation or your conductor has given you a translation, or there's a translation in the front of the score, but not in the score itself, I think it's nice as I'm singing to be able to know what the words are that I'm singing. You can always write dynamics, of course, either circling dynamics that are written in the score, or sometimes conductors want to do dynamics that aren't written in the scores, and you will mark that in so that they only have to say it. Ooh, look, I saw a typo. So that they only have to say it hopefully once, and then you have it marked in. Breath marks, of course, when we're singing, breath marks are really important, whether it is a breath that you are all going to take as a group that you decide on as a section, or that the conductor gives you, or whether you're staggering with the person next to you, you might want to coordinate with them and mark where the breath marks are. And when you're in rehearsal, it's good to circle parts that you want to work on at home. So if you come across a part, the song is going by, everything is fine, and then all of a sudden there's a weird interval that you don't get, or a weird rhythm that you don't get. Draw a circle around that. So when you come back to it later and you're ready to practice, you can hit that spot first, right? When your brain is fresh, rather than singing through and, maybe or maybe not noticing a problem when you're on your own. It's a really great idea to write the note that you're going to sing next at the end of a system or at the end of a page. I learned from Gary that is called a kustos. And that this practice has been around for centuries. I usually do an arrow up or down at the end of a page to know if I'm singing higher or lower, and then the note that I'm going to. Rhythm. So this first part that I want to highlight are like for people who either can't sing at home because there are people living with them who, who are working from home and they have to be quiet, or because they are not comfortable singing at home. Maybe you're not comfortable. Maybe you don't play the piano or have access to a keyboard where you can sing notes at home. I like to think of learning music as like layers of an onion. And if you can take care of those first couple of layers, then learning just your pitches at rehearsal is going to be so much easier if you already have taken care of knowing what your rhythms are, knowing where there are key changes, all of that fun stuff. So you'll have to excuse my very crude Microsoft Paint markings that I did in my score. I don't have a fancy drawing mechanism on my computer or software on my computer. So the first thing I do, look through the score and take note of the time signatures. And sometimes you'll notice, like this particular line of music, the time signature changes 4 different times, right? It goes from 6/4 to 4/4 to 2/4. And then right at the end of the system, it gives you a change for 4/4. This is something I almost always miss when I'm sight reading is a time signature change or a key signature change that happens at the end of a system, because I've already moved on and we're in a whole new key or a whole new time signature and I didn't even notice, right? I always miss that. So always I go through and look for those and circle them. In this case, since we have a 4 on the bottom all the way through, it means a quarter note is getting a beat all the way through. If the quarter note is staying constant, it's not such a big deal, right? Because it's just each bar has a different number of quarter note beats in it, right? But as long as we're staying steady with our quarter note beats, it's not a big deal. But sometimes you'll have time signature changes like from 3/4 to 12/8, and all of a sudden the beat changes tempo and you want to be ready for that. And just a word about time signatures. Again, this is for people who, maybe don't have a ton of other musical experience other than singing in a choir, and maybe we've never thought about time signatures before, right? So there are basically two kinds of time signatures. You have your simple meter, where usually there's a 2 or a 4 on the bottom. Usually there is an even number on the top. Here you'll notice the first bar only has 3 quarter notes in it. That's because those are 3 upbeats or pickups into the first full bar is this whole note here, which means if the publisher did it right, the last bar before the repeat sign at the end of this section is only going to have 1 beat in the bar, so that you sing 1 beat there, you do your repeat back and have 3 more beats. So when we're in simple time meter or simple meter, the quarter note, let's say the quarter note is getting 1 beat. Usually our main beats are divided into 2 sections. So like there are 2 eighth notes and a quarter note. That gets 1 beat. Simple time, simple meter. We also have what's called compound time. And compound time is when you have usually an 8, sometimes a 16 on the bottom, meaning the 8th note or the 16th note gets 1 beat. And the top number when we're in compound time is usually divisible by 3. So 6/8, 9/8, 12/8. And you can see here in the piano part that it's divided into groups of 3 eighth notes, which is a dotted quarter note. And there are 2 groups per measure, meaning there are 2 dotted quarter note beats in the measure. And so it has like a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3. A lot of like lullabies are in 6/8. Songs about water and the ocean often are in 6/8. Anything that has that kind of swingy feeling to it. This is from a solo vocal piece, but it's only because that's what I had available to me on my computer. You'll see this a lot in choral music as well. I always recommend taking a look at if there's a piano part or a piano reduction in the scores. There's not always, but you'll see here in the vocal line, they've individually flagged all the eighth notes that have a separate syllable to sing underneath, meaning all 6 eighth notes in this bar are individually flagged, and I have no idea from looking at that where the main beats of the measure are. But if I look at the piano reduction, I see 2 groups of 3 because they've barred all the eighth notes together in a way that makes sense. I was raised as a pianist, so I'm used to looking at that. And you see in this piece in particular, you're going back and forth between 6/8 time and 3/4 time, which is a simple meter time. And even though they have technically the same number of eighth notes, right? They both have 6 eighth notes or 3 quarter notes in each bar. You can see here in the piano part, here we have 2 sets of 3. Here we have 3 sets of 2 or 3 quarter note beats. Yeah. Again, excuse my very crude drawings, but I like to use, for sets of 3 eighth notes, I like to use these little triangles. And for sets of 2 eighth notes, I like to use little slashes. This is also really useful if you happen to be singing in a choir and doing something that's in a funky key signature, or sorry, time signature, like 7/8 or 5/8. Sometimes 11/8. Sometimes, often a composer is grouping together eighth notes if you're in, say, 7/8 into two groups of two, one group of three. 2 plus 2 plus 3 is 7, right? So like bum 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 bum. And sometimes where the group of 3 is in those 3 beats will change from bar to bar. So bum 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 bum, right? And if I don't draw little triangles and slashes above my part, then I am certain to get lost. I also highly recommend not being ashamed of drawing vertical lines where the beats are. And here I did it on the piano part, but you can see if I did it over here where the vocal line comes in, if I have a line going through the notes in the vocal line where a main beat happens, then I know where the groups are and I know where my part fits in. So the first thing you want to do is count the rhythm or speak the rhythm, no text, no music. And I took this little thing, so I drew where my beats are each time. So we're in 4/4 time. I know this is the middle of the piece, so the time signature isn't written there, but goes all the way through. So in the middle of where the sopranos are holding their dotted quarter note is where the second beat happens. It looks like the first tenors have a note on beat 2. The basses have a note on beat 2. On beat 3, we draw it all the way down. On beat 4, we draw it all the way down. Now, if I'm a bass and I'm looking at this, it's pretty easy, right? I just have a note on each beat. Bump, 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 or 1, 2, 3, 4, right? If I'm a soprano, things are a little more complicated in that I have first 2 different rhythms on the 2 bars and some dotted rhythms and things to think about. So if I've drawn where my beats are, then I know that I'm holding my dotted quarter note through beat 1, and the second quarter note that I see comes on beat 3 and holds through. So I have, if I were going to count, it would be 1 and 3 and 2 and 3, 4, right? For both of those bars. Or if I were just going to say do whatever syllable works for the rhythm, you can conduct yourself, you can keep time on your leg. Bum, 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 right? If you take the time to just do that, if say you sight read something at rehearsal, there are 4 bars where you're like, I don't know what the rhythm is doing there. You circle that part. You take the time to do that. You're going to be so far ahead of the game when you come back that, it's really easy. It'll be much easier to fit in the text, to fit in the notes, if you know what the rhythm is going to be. Now you'll see that the altos and the second tenors have a much more interesting rhythm here. That's unusual. Usually the alto has the least amount to do in both rhythm and melody. But we have 3 16th notes, a 16th rest, 8th rest, 8th note, right? 2 16ths, quarter. And you see everything is barred individually because there's different syllables on each note, and so I don't necessarily see where the beats are. So, but after I've written my beats in, then I see I have 1 E and 3 E and, yes, 1 E and 3 E and, right? So, or ba 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 ba, right? I was just tapping in 8th notes, not in quarter notes, but ba 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 ba. We're a little bit luckier in that are rhythm repeats there, right? But that would definitely be something most of us, myself maybe included, would have to look at home. I would also recommend doing, like, don't try and do a whole piece of music this way because it gets really boring really fast. It can be quite tedious work. So I would say 2 measures, 3 measures, 1 measure, a small section at a time. If a piece is in a foreign language, consider asking the conductor if they don't offer this to your choir. If you are in a choir that has a bunch of people who haven't sung in this language a lot, or it's a large choir and we all just want to make sure that there's continuity in the way that everybody is pronouncing things, right? Ask the conductor or the section leader for an audio file of the spoken text if they don't automatically provide that. Even in a language that many of us have sung in before, then it's consistent, right? Because we all have slightly different ways of pronouncing different things, and we all know it's going to make the best ensemble if we're all pronouncing things the same way. So definitely consider asking for spoken text. IPA. So I know that Michael Bennett gave a great talk on IPA for those of you who heard it last time or want to look it up on YouTube. And Michael Bennett has a degree in linguistics and knows so much about IPA, and you can really go down a rabbit hole with IPA, and that's the International Phonetic Alphabet. So each sound has a symbol, and so in theory, if one is familiar with IPA, one can look at any language written in IPA and know how to pronounce everything. Of course, there are little details that make it sound more authentic for each language. But I like to use IPA as a tool. And for me, there are 6 to 10 symbols that I use a lot, that I will just make little notes for myself in the score. And I tend to think of them in groups, right? Because there are vowel sounds and consonant sounds that I will tend to flip back and forth or say the wrong one if I don't have a note about which one I'm gonna say. So I like to use, so the IPA symbols are over here on the left, and I've drawn very neat looking circles in different colors around the pairs. So this is a lowercase I, and this, for those of you who can't see it on your monitor, is an uppercase I, and that is the difference between the E sound, like in see and heat, and the I sound, like hit. I find, especially singing in languages that don't have a short I sound, Italian or Latin, if I have a syllable, or all the time I hear students, if they have a syllable that, particularly ones that end in N, that look like the word in on the page, will automatically just pronounce it as a short I sound, which of course does not exist in Italian. So I, all the time, am using especially the E, the lowercase I, and writing it over words that I'm singing to remind myself not to use my American accent and put in short I sounds. The next pair that I use a lot is this is a lowercase e. This is a symbol that looks like a backwards 3, and that is the difference between a closed e, like an a sound, like in 8 or way, and an sound, like in met or bed. Again, there are some languages that use both. French uses both depending on which way the accent is going, among other things. Yeah, so I use that a lot. This is the difference between a closed O and an open O. So the difference between like home and ought, right? O, ah. That is a difference you see a lot in Italian, uses both of those, and depending on where an O falls in a word or what letters are around it, we use a closed O or an open O. So I use that a lot. On the consonant side, This one I use a lot. So this little like long S sound or symbol is for the SH sound, sh, like she. And this little like cursive Z is the same sound but voiced, j, pleasure, right? I especially use this SH sound. I find that in a lot of languages, I've sung things in Hungarian, for example, that have a lot of sh sounds that don't look like an SH, right? They look like an S. And I have to remind myself to use an SH. If I'm singing in a language like French that has both an SH and a voiced SH sound, then I'll use both of those. And then these two funny little symbols, this kind of omega, or not omega, theta symbol, and this, which looks like a little lowercase d with a little slash through it, is the TH sound. Unvoiced for this one, and this is the voiced version. This, right? And a lot of times I'll use just little symbols, because if I'm looking at a bunch of IPA, then I get bogged down in figuring out what every single symbol means. And you'll see just looking through this is just a basic list of IPA symbols, but you'll see a lot of the consonants are either exactly what we would expect them to be or very close to what we would expect them to be. A lot of the vowels are kind of self-explanatory, I find, when I'm singing in different languages. I don't need to do a lot of those other symbols. And then, depending on what language I'm singing in, if I'm singing in a language that's totally unfamiliar to me, Japanese, there might be new IPA symbols that I learned just for singing in that language. But these are pretty applicable to all languages. In addition, if you're singing in French, we have nasal vowels. So like the difference between o and on, a nasal vowel. And that is indicated in IPA by a little squiggle over the top, like a little, it's not a cedilla, a little tilde accent over a vowel. I am constantly, when I'm singing in French, writing little nasal symbols over words. And that just reminds me that that word has a nasal vowel in it. Again, I know I said this earlier, I would write a full translation. If you're singing in a foreign language, write a full translation into your score. I just think it's much more interesting to sing music if I know what the words mean. And if it's on a separate piece of paper or I have to flip back in my book to see it, I'm not going to pay attention to what the words mean. I might kind of know it in the back of my mind, but it's not there to remind me all the time. So learn your rhythms and then speak your text in rhythm, again, in small sections of your piece. If you can do those two things, learning the pitches, if you need to do that in rehearsal, is going to be so much easier if you already have those two layers out of the way, right? You also want to look for places in the text that are repetitive, where whole sections come back. For me, I know that looking at a brand new piece of music that's 16 pages long might feel overwhelming. And then if I realize 4 of those pages at the end are just the same as the first 4 pages at the beginning, that always makes me feel better. So always look for places that are repeated, because that's just work that you're not going to have to repeat. Okay, I'm going to talk about learning notes in the next section. So are there any questions so far?
There we go. Any questions that have come in, actually, you have already addressed organically.
Oh, fabulous.
Congratulations. I think, so I'll reiterate a couple things that really struck to me, which is writing those markings over the full staff and looking at the piano. It's so easy just to look at our own little line without looking elsewhere. For those interested in more information on score markings, and for more information on the International Phonetic Alphabet, as Melissa mentioned, we do have 2 talks already available for that. The score markings one is where I go on and on and on myself with all tons of examples and such. And everything that I said in that, if you've seen that already or about to, is entirely complementary to what Melissa said, even if it's different. That we have different styles
Yeah,
that
I think
we
every musician who marks a score regularly develops their own kind of shorthand, right?
yeah.
Like I could look at somebody else's score and their markings would make some of them would make sense to me, but some of them wouldn't make any sense to me at all, and vice versa, right?
I remember when we were singing the Brahms Liebeslieder together, and I looked over Melissa's shoulder onto the score, and you had all your English like, written around the edges, and I thought I could never do that. I have to write mine really teensy underneath each word in
And
the
see, I
text.
just can't write really teensy, so I have to scrawl it around the side.
Well, as to that point, I see we have another a question that's come in on how do you see the text or the notes when there are, the music itself,
Hmm.
when there are so many markings. I write really
Yeah.
tiny, I don't have a problem. How do you deal with that?
I mean, what you saw in the markings that I showed was not really necessarily indicative if I have a pencil in my hand and I'm writing. I know that a lot of those markings kind of covered up the notes. I would say if you're using a highlighter or writing in a colored pencil, you can usually see the notes through that anyway. But also, I find just going through the process of putting all those marks in there and going to rehearsals, the notes become the least important thing that I need to see to remind me what need to be doing at that point. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Yeah.
the act of doing it reinforces it, so it's easier to see it in its own
Right.
way.
Yeah.
Great. All right, let's move onward.
Okay. So now you've done all of this work without singing anything. I would highly recommend. I know a lot of you have a piano background. You have access to a piano or a keyboard at home. I'm sitting next to a piano right now. That's fantastic. But even just learning the notes on a piano, they repeat every octave, right? So learning the notes on a piano is easy to do and well worth your time. There are only 12, right? Between C and the next C. Knowing where they are on the piano, everybody has access. Well, most of us, actually, everybody who's here must have access to a computer. You wouldn't be here. Everybody has access to an app on their phone or on their tablet or on their computer that is at least an octave of a keyboard that's going to be really helpful for just picking out pitches or doing a starting pitch. So I would highly, if you're only going to learn one thing about music, I would learn where those notes are on the piano. That's just going to make even the possibility of singing at home, even if you don't have access to a full-size keyboard or piano, it's just going to make it so much easier. And I was just going to point out one of the places where that's really going to come in handy is places like this. Now, these two parts look exactly the same, right? But here we have a B flat going up to a C flat, which if you know your notes on the piano, you know that that's only a half step, right? Or a minor second. Whereas down here you have a G flat going to an A flat, which if you know your notes on a piano, you know is a whole step. Whereas if you didn't have any knowledge of the keyboard, they look like the same interval, right? And I would also say, once you've learned your keys on the piano, the next most important thing is being able to pick out and sing and know the difference between a couple of key intervals. And I think a minor second versus a major second, a half step versus a whole step is probably the most important. After that, minor third versus major third, perfect fourth versus perfect fifth versus tritone, which is right in the middle. I think you can never go wrong. And there are a million musictheory.net or there's another like music learning website, music theory learning website called musicalu.com that have, if you're interested, lots of different little ear training exercises. When you're in rehearsal, and I know I mentioned before, when I'm in rehearsal, even if I have a score that I have used a lot of colors on, when I'm in rehearsal, I usually just have a pencil. There are two reasons for that. First of all, not every marking that I make in a rehearsal is going to be a permanent marking, right? Sometimes I circle, a phrase where I have trouble picking out the pitches. Then I go home and I practice it, then I know that circle doesn't need to be there anymore, right? If it is something that needs to be there, like the conductor has indicated a breath mark or some dynamics there, I can write that in, and then I can go in later, erase that, and write it in the appropriate color, and that then it's in the right color, and it also is like reinforcement the next day. I would say the most important day to practice and reinforce something is the day after you do it in rehearsal. You're going to get the most return, even if you don't have time to practice for the rest of the week. You're going to get the most return when some of what the conductor has said is still fresh in your mind, or the sound of the song is still fresh in your mind, rather than waiting until, a half hour before rehearsal starts the next week and going, oh yeah, I was going to practice that part. Not that you shouldn't do that if you haven't practiced all week. Like, absolutely look at that part, but know that, if you're anything like me, I forget things in like a day and a half. So you want to look at it when everything is still fresh. When we are learning notes, a lot of times, especially if you're singing, like this is something by Bach, it's from a Bach Cantata, runs, right? They're scary looking on the page because we look at this and look at the soprano line. It's like a million notes long, right? And if you just look at that run and don't break it down at all, it's totally overwhelming to look at, right? Luckily, composers have helped us out often in a run. So there are certain things you want to look at. You want to, especially in Bach and Handel, a lot of Baroque things, but later composers as well, they would use what are called sequences, where you have a pattern that repeats itself, a step up or a step down, multiple times. And so if you can figure out where those are, now all of a sudden, okay, well, this is only 3 patterns. It's not 24 notes that I need to learn, right? So once I've learned the first pattern, I can sing it a step up. I can sing it back a step down. I also want to look for the general shape of things. So where notes are going down, where notes are going up, where we have stepwise motion, or where we have, like here, there's a third right at the end. So this little pattern, and then it just repeats a step up, and then it goes back. So if I can break that up, it makes much more sense to my brain. I think for practicing it, absolutely practicing it those 8 notes at a time, or I'm pointing at my computer, like you can all see what I'm pointing at. I would practice it a pattern at a time, or even 4 notes at a time. But when you're breaking something into sections, I always recommend, and this is something that I always did playing the piano growing up, my teachers always had me practice this way. When you're learning a long run, always include the first note of the next part of the run, the next little section. So if I were going to learn this first thing, this first pattern, I would sing the pattern and end on this A flat here. Then when I sang the second one, I would start on the A flat, go through to the next G, right? And then start on the G, go through to that A flat. Then I might put 2 together. Go all the way, end on that G. Maybe go back to the A flat, do 2 together, end on that A flat, and then do them all. So I think going back and forth between doing the whole run under tempo and doing small chunks of the run up to tempo, once you figure out what the pattern is and how that works in your voice, is a great way to learn runs. And just a couple of things that I wanted to say at the end. I also, a lot of us use recordings. I think it's great to ask the conductor at the beginning of the rehearsal process if they have a favorite recording or some favorite recordings of the piece. partially because, they've obviously listened to it and been influenced by it. And a lot of what they might choose to do in terms of tempo, in terms of where they're taking time or taking breaths might be influenced by that. So it's likely to be closer to what you're doing, whereas there's a huge variance in interpretation between recordings, right? If you obviously have a favorite recording of a piece that you want to put on, I think that is also great. But always ask the conductor if they don't volunteer that information. A lot of people like to listen in their car. In normal times, I have about an hour and 20 minutes commute to each of the colleges that I teach at. And I have used recordings in my car to memorize recital music or learn choral music many, many times. I think that while you're driving, of course, you don't want to be distracted while you're driving. So, you should know the piece to a point where you don't have to be actively thinking about it all the time. But while you're driving can be, like found time in your day to learn something. There are also a lot of MIDI files available, and sometimes choirs, like section leaders in choirs or somebody in a choir, is very generous with their time and will make MIDI files of something. Usually that happens, it's like playing one vocal line at a time, usually on a keyboard or other electronic instrument. So there's not a lot in terms of breath marks and dynamics. It's mostly just, here are your pitches that you're going to sing. Those can also be really useful, especially if you don't have access to a keyboard at home, or if you learn really well by listening to something. Active versus passive rehearsing and practicing. I think, and I talked about this in my last talk that I did as well, which was about long choir rehearsals and what we should do to survive long rehearsals. It's really important to have moments and times. I mean, ideally it's all the time, but most of us by the end of the day are mentally kind of done, and we need sort of a break when we're practicing and rehearsing, where you're really active. And that means, I'm paying attention to what I'm singing so that I know if there's a phrase that goes by where I didn't necessarily pronounce something correctly, I can circle that. I'm just really aware of what is going on. Passive rehearsing and practicing, is obviously the opposite, right? And I really think, singing together in a group, in a choir, has so many benefits beyond just music. Study after study after study has shown emotional benefits and psychological benefits and neurological benefits, and it's good for healthy aging and everything. And right now we're missing that, right? I think that singing along to a recording, while it's certainly not going to replicate being with our colleagues and our friends and singing together, is gonna approximate some of those benefits, mostly because when we're singing along with a recording, we're aware of the relationships between our parts. I think we've all experienced something where, like, you practice a part on your own and you think you know it, and then all of a sudden when the other parts are there, it feels different to us, and all of a sudden we don't know it as well. It's going to take care of those places. And I think there's just something lovely about singing in a group of people. And I know making virtual choir recordings, I think we all were maybe pleasantly, maybe unpleasantly surprised of like, oh, this is what I sound like singing this line by myself. It's not at all what I thought I sounded like singing this line by myself. And, that's just the way we are doing things right now. But that singing along to recordings is a fantastic, even if you are more passive in when you're singing in the car, when you're just relaxing. And I would definitely say all of the techniques that I talked about up until now are very active techniques, and they are very focused, and they're great because they will, improve your focus the more you do them. But I would say it's just as important to remind yourself that this is a beautiful piece of music and this is what it sounds like when it's all together. And, I think that if you have, say, 30 minutes to practice your choir music, I would say maybe the first 10 minutes you're going to spend, marking in your score or doing really focused work. And then maybe the last 20 minutes you're just going to turn on the recording and sing, right? Because we all are members of choirs because we love to sing and we love to sing together. And I think it's important to remind ourselves of that and to give ourselves as much of an opportunity as we can to do that even during these times. Also remember that practice doesn't make perfect. Practice makes more permanent, right? So if you're practicing something and you don't know if you're doing it right, or you don't know if you're singing the right notes, or you're not sure of the rhythm, I would say don't spend a ton of time reinforcing that, because if it's wrong, then you've learned it that way and it's going to be harder to undo, right? I would say if you're unsure of something, wait until the next rehearsal, ask the conductor, your section leader about it, and then practice it that way once you know that it's right. Because it's amazing how unlearning a habit is really, really hard, even if it's something that we think should be easy for us, like putting a breath in a different place, or, any little thing that we think is going to be easy. All of a sudden, if we've really learned it and our body and our muscles have really learned it one way, if we're not really thinking about it, it just has become a habit, right? So that is all that I have. Do I have any more questions?
That was wonderful. I'm seeing accolades come in about where folks are saying, "I've never tried that before. That's brilliant."
Oh, good.
Yeah. Especially, I appreciate your notion of how to do the melismas, how to manage the runs, and always stopping on the downbeat so you know where you're gonna start from next.
I had a piano teacher who just drilled that into me, like working up facility and things. Like, it was always like if you're trying to put sections together after you've learned one chunk and another chunk, and you don't have that crossover, that thing linking them, it's so much harder to do.
Yeah, I also appreciated your notion of the wisdom of practicing the day after the rehearsal for retention. I'm gonna reinforce that if I may interject,
Yay.
and I'm of the opinion also that 10 minutes a day for every day will
Mm-hmm.
do better for your learning than 1 hour one day during the week.
Sadly, yes. I mean, I
Yeah.
say sadly because I'm not a do something every day kind of person, but
Yeah, neither am I.
that is
But
true.
yeah,
I'm
that
more of
idea.
a put everything off until the last possible second and then do it all right then.
Yeah, well, that's the universe. That's,
But yeah,
it's how
I
we tend
mean,
to
but
function.
it's true. And I think back to musicians that I know, people who really practice every day, who like really make it a point to practice every day and do like the same warm-ups every day. Trumpet players come to mind. I find that a lot of brass players really have internalized that in a way that a lot of the rest of us musicians have not. And because if they don't do their long tones every day, I mean, their embouchure pays for it even a
Yeah.
day later.
Well, same with
Yeah.
singing. There's the musculature
Yeah,
that's involved
absolutely.
in training that. We do have a few questions, two regarding virtual choirs. Commenting one, the ease when you have the section leader singing just that part. That's another thing
Mm-hmm.
you might be able to request of your section leader or conductor. And the other is, and Scott, you may have some opinions on this too, I think, in how to deal with the psychological shock when you first hear your own voice isolated when you're recording for virtual choir. And I'd add, it's not just for that circumstance, but when you're singing at home and you hear
Right.
yourself,
Yeah,
Yeah.
this is something that Melissa, you may be getting this in your studio. About half of my studio lesson time is spent counseling before and after
Yep.
virtual choir recordings because of the psychological effect.
Mm-hmm.
We're choral musicians. We we are used to having another human body next to us for things like intonation. We're used
Mm-hmm.
to having ensemble and all of those other things that contribute to our sense of acoustics and our intonation. We're, by the way, we're going to be talking about intonation at the end of the in sometime in May or June. But the thing that I would remind people is that what the feedback that we get as singers is not just our ears, right? We rely on all kinds of biofeedback in order to create a good choral tone, a good choral sound. So first of all of that feedback is missing, and then second, we are using technology rather than the replay and the recording is all through technology. We don't have all of the other kinds of feedback through replay that we would expect either. So it's not you. It's just not you. And this isn't normal. And it is. And so what you are hearing is not your normal product. Is not your normal choral product. It's diminished by the fact that you don't have all of the other usual supports with you.
Yeah, and you're not in the space where you usually sing either. Like, I've only done a couple of virtual choir things, and I sing, by myself in here all the time, and I teach voice all day, and I hear nothing but my own voice. But it was horrifying. It's horrifying. The first time you have to do a virtual choir.
And I have a personal rule. I'm 3 and done. If I can't get it in 3 takes, that's it. Whatever the best of 3 is what the technician is getting.
Yep.
And
then it's their problem.
Yeah, and I don't know, Melissa. I mean, I've done studio work, and this doesn't feel like studio work. It's not like when you got 1 year in the can and it doesn't feel like that either.
Yeah, or maybe another person there with you to say, "Hey, this part was a little out of tune, or you were a little late on this entrance."
Exactly.
Or
so it's not you, and it feels really demoralizing when I'm done. I just feel like I want to walk away and not do it again. But then the product comes back, and the genius is on the other end that can make it all happen.
Absolutely. It's amazing what audio engineers do
if
during this time.
If they don't have anything to work with, right, to begin with, then their product is diminished. So the more people in your ensemble that are contributing to the virtual choir, the better the end result is. So as much as possible, send in those virtual choir recordings.
And if we can take a step back from our ego and how shocked we are about how we sound by ourselves, it really is a good opportunity to work on some things that maybe you're not hearing yourself do when you're singing with a group, right?
Kevin just brought up a really good point. Also, I have pandemic voice, not much left because I haven't been singing as much. So two things that I want to point out. One, we're all going to have a heck of a time when rehearsals start again in the future because we're all out of shape. Every single one of us are out of shape. I know that I have, after a long teaching day, I'm like, oh, wow, where did it all go? The things that you can do to help yourself are to warm up 3 times a week for 10 minutes a day. Just warm up. I have my folks, Melissa, do you do bubble phonation with your people? Have you ever done bubble phonation? Yeah.
Yep.
Bubble
I have
phonation,
my little straws that I keep right here.
Bubble phonation, straw phonation are great ways to use intraoral air pressure to keep yourself in shape. That would be my hint for that.
Yeah. Gary, you were going to say something and we totally interrupted you.
All is tended to.
Okay, good.
All's well. What I will say, though, is thank you to Melissa for this wonderful presentation. It's good to have so many different levels of things you can do with the piano, without, how much of it is just mental, how much of it you can align physically. It's fantastic. Thank you also to our participants for your fine questions and contributions. Our next class is, I don't have the date in front of me. Scott, do you have that?
March 25th, Michael Bennett's music theory class.
Oh, right. A bit more about
Ooh, another repeat.
yeah, key signatures and more. Right, our second repeat instructor. So we'll hope you consider looking into that one. All of us at the Emerald Ensemble are grateful for the enthusiasm that you, our audiences and supporters, have shown. As this Emerald Choral Academy continues, you can help to support these efforts by donating at emeraldensemble.org. And you can also let us know of topics that you would like to see discussed in the future. Some of them this semester, in fact, came from your minds. In the meantime, I am Gary Cannon, and on behalf of all the Emerald Ensemble, I wish you good physical, mental, and musical health. Thank you.
Thank you.
And scene. Thank you all very much for being here.
Oh, thanks for asking me to do it. It was good to kind of, like go through, because I think a lot, those of us who have